Welcome back to Hacker Hangouts on a Saturday morning, and we have the whole crew here, which I'm thrilled about. And I don't know if anyone else who is watching, I'm curious if you're only hearing Gulo in your left ear, or I am the only one who has that pleasure. So as Gulo starts talking, I'm curious. Gulo, you say something amazing.
Amazing.
There we go. So I don't know if everyone else got that amazingness just in their left ear or both. I know I'm getting your AC, but that being said, though, whatever. We're here, and we get to hang out, and I am actually quite excited about this.
So even you can hear Gulo in both ears. You have a chance to gaslight Silk, so use it wisely.
Stream is left only. Aha! It's not just me. Gator... You're either gaslighting me or legitimately.
I am not gaslighting you. I
crazy.
promise. It is working on both ears. I can hold it up to the microphone, my friend.
Oh, that is hilarious. Somehow we have found a glitch where both you guys hear him stereo. I just hear it mono. So maybe, I don't know, I'll dork with it and I'll find I'm just pushing him to one on the stream. But for everyone else, I'll deal with it in between. We have a lot to talk about. We have so much to talk about. I have 4 topics written down, and the thing that there's too many G names. You have so many G handles. Gowry, the one that he threw out was talking about Meta open sourcing their VR headset, and it was well, if we do that, we have to have Gulo here, who lives and breathes in VR. And then I wanted to talk the TikTok ban, network neutrality, and I'm sure with all 4 of us, we have to talk DEF CON because why wouldn't we have all 4? With that, let's start with what I think is the most fascinating one. I got this interesting message forwarded to me about network neutrality, that they're rolling back the Trump changes and they're rolling back in network neutrality. And then in light of this, too, we have a zillion states who passed network neutrality. This kind of starts feeling like it's weirdly connected to the TikTok ban in kind of a loose thread. And I want to hit that in a minute. Let's talk network neutrality. They're rolling back the changes, which pretty much reintroduce network neutrality. Best way I've heard describe network neutrality is they treat ISPs as a utility, so it works just like electricity. You can't say if you plug in your toaster gets priority electricity over your refrigerator or something like that, or your appliances get better electricity than your computer. Sort of similar to internet is you can't say Netflix, Verizon. I think it was Verizon who totally got whacked with this one, which was they were slowing down Netflix and increasing their streaming services. So that's network neutrality. What are you guys' thoughts on this one? Because I actually do have, I think, both sides of this one a little bit.
So obligatory fuck a Jeep pie. I think that's his name, right? Yeah. Obligatory for getting rid of it. Now so first things first, the fact that we're going to be going and doing this this is going to be back and forth with every administration now, right? With every new FCC, it's going to be oh, we have it, now we don't, and we have it, now we don't. They just need to just pass a fucking law and just make it law, because then it's harder to repeal. But no, so you're exactly right. Although the funny thing is, you're mentioning your toaster can't get priority electricity compared to your refrigerator. Well, it could be the case that your toaster gets priority internet and your refrigerator doesn't. Right? That could totally have been a thing. And that is kind of the basis of the net neutrality thing. And it's crazy we're still talking about this. And I think somebody brought this up a pretty good way. So the idea being they have to treat a packet as a packet, and they have to just treat packets the same. They can't increase latency or give you less bandwidth or whatever based on who you're talking to. They just got to sell you the pipe and let you use that pipe however you want. And someone pointed this out, that the ISPs very likely are going to do what most online gaming companies have done, or most gaming companies have figured out, that the negative incentive is actually not the way to get things past society. But instead, what you do is instead of slowing everyone else down, you sell priority latency to folks like gamers. I don't know what is going on with the
Yeah,
camera.
sorry, I'm
Gotta
trying to fix
stop
it.
messing with it. Good Lord, man. So the idea being like, you made me lose my entire train of thought. So,
Just keep
the
doing
idea
it.
is ISPs in response to this may actually not. This may not ultimately do what folks are intending, because there's been a major thought change on how you implement tiered services this way, and the idea being, instead of slowing people down actively if they happen to be using service X, Y, and Z, instead you just sell people the slow access to all of that, and then you create another tier. And then you just charge people for that higher tier. And we've seen this happen across most digital services like streaming. Now, there's a free tier with ads, there's a less free tier with still ads, and then there's like the no ads tier, right? And unless you pay for, and then even on the no ads tier, sometimes there's still ads depending on what the content is, which is, talk about it, shitification, right? But like, this is what I think is ultimately going to happen, because ISPs are not going to want to play this game of, it's the rules, now it's not the rules, it's the rules, now it's not the rules. So I don't know ultimately what to think about it. So
Well, the other piece of this is, go on, Gulo.
So the ISPs have already been forced to do the net neutrality thing because of laws that have been passed in like California and Oregon and Washington. So, and I think there's a handful of other states as well that have imposed the net neutrality laws. So I don't think it's going to bounce. It may bounce back and forth as per the FCC, but unless they start setting up like different tiers for what state you're coming from, I don't think that there's going to be much of a difference or much of an issue for the ISPs.
Gator, what's your thoughts? We haven't heard from you in a minute, and I'll jump in.
So this one is going to be interesting because in practice, when they go through and actually say it's set in stone and in law, seeing the tiered systems come up, and I've seen like what literally Gulo just said, California went even further than what the FCC wants to go through and do. They went through and they banned the practice called zero rating. So in that case, where like mobile providers might strike a business deal to steal users towards a particular streaming service by zoning out other ones. The problem is we've seen a lot of laws also change on what is bandwidth minimums from ISPs. So if you were in a rural area, then they used to have it at 25 megabit per second. Since then, and it depended on also different caps as well. I'm in one of those more rural areas, and we have a single provider via cable. And while we have the digital 395 in California, where you're supposed to be able to plug into fiber, that sat there for like 10 years unused because the monopoly would run anybody else out of town. Then this is a slight deterrence, but it comes back to, they are starting now to bring up what the minimum tier is for what you need for bandwidth. So now it's you need a minimum of 500 megabits per second. And by the way, now we have no caps. After forever, we've had caps on your data. So it seems like a lot of political BS that we haven't got real rules on what is this actually going to affect for the end user. And that's per state too, right?
It's interesting to me, like, as much as the California laws drive me nuts in many ways, like they're private, like, but they're also leading so many places, like privacy. We've talked about the travesty of the privacy laws that we have in this country. California is doing something about it. There's other things they don't do where they're doing it like, this one's a weird one. The network neutrality one is super goofy. The more I think about it, the goofier and harder it gets. Because in some ways, I am not a fan of the government going, hey, here is how you run a private business, or here's how you run a public business. Like, effectively, that is. The government is coming in and they're saying, Verizon, you cannot do a free tier and give people free tier or slow them down or anything like that. And they're regulating it. On the other side of things, these type of businesses fall almost in the healthcare space, like in the same point, going like, I don't like it being regulated, but if it's not regulated, it tons of problems ensure. Because like I look at my neighborhood, I have Spectrum. That is all I get. I have zero other option. No one else can rent their equipment. That the only way I get broadband is through them. So if they want to raise my rate, if they want to do that, I have zero other options. This is where the give and take though is. I will be interested to see how the more mass expansion of ultra wideband 5G impacts the competitiveness. Now the problem is I can go through Spectrum, and my mobile carrier is through Spectrum, which is a MIMO or whatever they call it of Verizon, who is also the 5G in which they use. And it's this massive incestuous relationship between all of the ISPs. So, like, is there actually competition? But let's assuming there was. I do like the fact that 5G is going to sort of add this competitive practice. The other piece of this is I get the idea of rolling it back in the federal level, giving the power to the states. But then this is where it becomes really gross, because on one side, there's the politics of all of it, which is how should we enforce network neutrality? Like, I wish we'd get to this point. We all agree with network neutrality. All the businesses, all the people, all of the government and everything like that, we agree with network neutrality. And then we're just debating on how to implement it properly. Like that, I'm okay with. But the fact that we're actually even considering like pulling it back is absolutely insane to me.
So we forgot to add our obligatory disclaimer before discussing this. This stream is known to cause cancer in the state of California.
Don't lick any doorknobs. A lot of things get labeled that way.
But no, I mean that's a good example of how these regulations can, if you leave it up to the states, it's like, wait, this is very confusing. Does it only cause cancer if I'm in California? Do I only get unfettered broadband if I'm living in California? And as soon as I cross into Nevada, they're free to do whatever they want. And the answer is more or less yes, except that it's a nightmare to try and build out that infrastructure in a state per state basis. And of course you have the real reason why this has to be federal is that you have businesses that operate in many states. And as soon as you cross state lines, it becomes a federal issue, right? So
look at the privacy thing within California is if I'm a Michigan-based business, a New York-based business, but I have clients in California, I need to follow that privacy regulation, which is different from the New York privacy regulation. Now, California kind of set the standard and everyone's kind of following them. But now all of a sudden you have 80 different regulations, which are all nuanced between them. And what happens if it's a California resident who's accessing the service in Oregon and they're VPNing to that? It's the whole thing becomes a giant mess.
Gulo, what do you got?
So as far as, I don't think you can have the states actually do the net neutrality stuff, and the main reason is because we only have a handful of ISPs now, and that what internet right now is definitely a public utility. The fact that it's been consolidated down to a handful of things, and the fact that our internet is lagging behind large swaths of the world for speed and service and reliability and stuff, the leaving it up to the businesses are not trustworthy enough to actually do anything other than pay attention to their bottom line. They don't care about the services. There's I'm currently house hunting. There's a ton of places all over the country that have almost no internet or have no internet. I have to go with satellite to actually get internet, and then I'm looking at 20 meg speeds up and down, and is just freaking ridiculous.
It's interesting how this. Oh, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say on that, we're talking about net neutrality. Net neutrality is not really the most interesting to talk about in terms of the internet. I think, as Silk said, California and a few other states have already pushed a lot of this stuff through anyway. But what Gulo's talking about is still a very real problem. Up on the farm in Vermont, there's a fiber drop a quarter mile away from a major set of houses, and the ISPs up there will not run the last mile wiring to hook those houses up. They just won't. It's not you have to pay multiple $1,000s. They're just like, no, thank you.
It's not profitable to them. This is where it's it is rough because it's not profitable for them. But we're looking at property and we're looking at farther up north, we're looking at 10 acres. And one of the things we're finding is some places, most places you're getting a well. Some places have natural gas. Some places the natural gas ends, 100 feet from the house, and then you have to pay them to run that. So like, we can't say internet is like they have to run that, because the natural gas companies don't have to run it. There's alternatives.
Well, the thing you didn't give me a chance to say was we already gave the ISPs tens of billions of dollars to run all of this, explicitly to run a national fiber network. It's not that they dictated and said, you shall pay for it yourself. No, we dictated it and said, here's the money. And then they didn't do it. So there's no excuse.
That one, I still go back to the, we subsidize health insurance companies, and it's like a whole nother stuff. I didn't even start that one, but it's like we subsidize health insurance companies. We subsidize the network ISPs. We subsidize utilities, and yet we still have all the same issues. And that is a whole nother topic. Let's just transition. Here we go. Speaking of regulation, that's the best I got. Speaking of regulation, TikTok ban. That is now signed into law. You got 9 months to sell. They either have to sell TikTok, or they have to, or it's banned. Now there's nuance to this, and there's gonna be more lawsuits and all of that filed, and appeals. But what are your guys' thoughts on this? Because I looked into it. There is precedent where we'll say, banned things like this, but not really on the consumer level, not really on this type of level. Like, for instance, like Kaspersky antivirus was banned on federal systems because it was a Russian antivirus.
That's been for a long time.
What was that?
TikTok's also banned on federal systems.
Yep. And but those ones can be enforced through like legitimately like group policy and like using phone, like that can be pushed down on the sort of like the IT level. We're talking about like pretty much national, like we don't have, we'll call it the Great Chinese Firewall. We don't have the Great US Firewall. So when this comes down, if it comes down, it's going to have it feels like kicking a giant like hornet's nest because they have to ban it on the ISP level. They effectively have to go to all the ISPs and say, hey, we don't want you to allow access into TikTok. Now, you're always going to be able to bypass it with things like a VPN and blah, 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 blah. Like, garbage VPN will be able to bypass it. But ultimately, it's going to have to come down to the ISP levels. Doesn't that terrify you in the sense that now this opens the little gap to now just like shove more through it? This is why network neutrality and this went like side by side for me. Gator?
So this one's going to be interesting. I'm interested to see actually what happens in 9 months, because there has been multiple attempts to have this happen. And when we were actually talking about this at our hackerspace last night as well, there are other countries, and I just looked up on like the AP, that there's a lot of other countries who've also gone through and banned TikTok. One of the ones that was brought up in the hackerspace yesterday was India. And once they went through and banned it, they actually went through and set up something more localized to their country and made it more interconnected than looking at TikTok. And I will say, as like content creation side of the house, which is a slight deterrent, YouTube Shorts have been pushing really, really hard to try to make up the gap that was just watching YouTube versus what TikTok has been offering with that short content and being able to feed that to you. So their algorithm, in my opinion, is not necessarily as good as TikTok's, but it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
Gula, or actually, Gowrie, before I hand it back to you, the other thing I'd love you to tie it to is the death of the subscriber, the death of the follower, because this does feel like it connects to that a little bit.
No, it has nothing to do with that. We can talk about that, but I don't think that's really going to have any effect. So they're calling it a TikTok ban, right? But what it actually is any foreign adversary controlled application being banned. And the way this is ultimately going to get implemented is they're just going to force app services, Google Play Store, Apple Store, whatever, are not going to be allowed to list these things by statute. If you want to sideload them onto your phone, if you have a jailbroken phone or an Android that you can just root because you don't have to jailbreak those things anymore. If you're going to sideload those out, you're still going to be able to get to it. Maybe the ISPs will be forced to try and disable, but I kind of doubt it. I think ultimately it's just going to be a delisting off of the stores, and then for anyone who is technically savvy enough, so none of Gen Z for the most part are going to be able to sideload the app.
Well, no, that's I disagree. They're even because they can just make a progressive web app, which runs in a browser, so you can run TikTok through Safari.
Yeah, that'll be handled via DNS, right? That'll be handled via DNS, right? Any major DNS provider will be forced to delist those services. These are relatively simple things to get around, but they're extraordinarily effective for the most of the populace, right?
The DNS is the ISP. Your default DNS server
Right.
is still your ISP.
But you're thinking about it like us. We'll be able to get around this if we want to. I have no desire to because I don't use TikTok. We'll be able to get around this in like 3 seconds. Any sufficiently curious teenager will be able to get around it in 3 seconds. But we're talking about 120 million users in the North American continent, lower 40, whatever. We're talking about 120 million users, right? This is going to be really effective at blocking about 100 million or like 90 million or 95 million of those people because they're going to say, oh, I can't get it on the App Store. Well, that thing is dead to me now, right? Like that's the way this is going to go ultimately. Now, it doesn't just affect TikTok. It's any foreign adversary controlled organization. And so that's we've had this discussion before. That's the critical piece, right? ByteDance, the parent company, by nature of it being a Chinese company, has a member of quote unquote the party on the board, and that makes it state controlled in a sense. And that's what we are banning, right? And so it's not only going to affect TikTok. I think everyone's hyper focused on TikTok. This is going to affect a lot more other things. And I do think, and I'll be the one that stands up and gets shot. I do think there are significant issues with that. And is this bill and the banning it the way to deal with it? I don't know. I guess this is the best that Congress could come up with. And I think most other countries that have gone through and banned this have the same concerns. And, just noting, like, China doesn't allow any of our social media apps either, but that's because they're, authoritarian assholes. So I'm not saying we should model our behavior based on China, but it is kind of an interesting way of viewing the issue as a form of economic warfare.
Mm-hmm. Gulo,
what do you got?
So I think that this is a very slippery slope. The fact that we're blocking TikTok means that we're going to start blocking more things that we deem whatever. And I disagree with doing that. I kind of disagree with blocking TikTok just because, I don't know, it's a Chinese plant company that has all kinds of ties back into the US, but is incredibly popular all over the world. You said 120 million users. I would almost say there's going to be 119 million users that are now blocked from TikTok, and there's only going to be maybe a million because there are not that many tech-savvy people out there that are going to be able to bypass this. I have my own special, separate phone that I use for TikTok. It has no ties to any other accounts, any other setups, anything else other than my internet, which it does spy on because I get all kinds of weird promotional things just based off of my browsing history. And I know that you're looking at me like that, but I just got a desk treadmill, and that is all of the ads that I get on TikTok now are about desk treadmills.
So
100%.
You saying that you're getting weird ads though, Gulo, sets a whole nother bar.
I know. That's what I was thinking.
There are other ads that I get that are kind of strange.
All I can think of is when you guys were talking about making the bidet, like the bidet hacking rig for DEF CON, and then for months later, we all just started getting ads for bidets. And it's like, then you buy one, and you're like, okay, cool, I have one. But then they think you're some sort of bidet connoisseur where you need like 40 of them, so they keep advertising them to you.
Yeah. How many pot? Yeah, I only have 2 toilets. Damn it! I don't need any more.
Go on.
Yeah, banning TikTok. I just think it is such a bad move because it's just going to open the door to anyone who decides that another country or another app or anything else is becoming too competitive in the U.S. markets. We're just going to stifle that competition. The other part of this is the Senate voted on this to approve it, but it was part of the foreign aid bill, correct? It wasn't, it's standalone. So they're like, hey, if we want to fund this thing that we've been trying to fund for months, we have to pass this as well. Screw it, let's just do it.
Yeah, and I mean, just to be clear, they it was looking like the U.S. was going in the direction of pretty decent consensus, at least in not amongst the people, amongst Congress. It seems like this would have passed anyway. It would have just taken much longer. And so this was a compromise of like a bunch of interests were like, well, let's just do this all at once. And that will make enough people happy because it's a campaign year. So they all want talking points, right? Yes, the pork barrel trading is what occurred.
Do we really want the 80-year-olds and 100-year-olds making the decisions of all of the future generations that are currently doing this?
No.
Like we can all, I only think this isn't even a point of debate. I think we definitely all agree on this one, but I think just the nationwide agrees. Like the one which just, oh gosh, you watch some of the questioning that was done with the CEO of TikTok. That was a travesty. Like that was the biggest train wreck of technology discussion like that has ever been seen. And the one that like I saw was like, does TikTok access the Wi-Fi network? And you can see the CEO doing like gymnastics in his brain going, how do I answer this without calling this person an idiot? He's like, yes. He's like, so just to confirm, it accesses the Wi-Fi network. Like, yes.
Yeah.
To access the internet. He's like, so let me get this straight. It is accessing your Wi-Fi network and everything on it. Oh, no, it's just the internet resources. But does it have the ability to scan the entire network, like your home network? Like it's going to be able to identify your devices. It's like, no. Like he goes, it's a technical discussion, so we'll have to think. Because you realize, like, well, in order, it does access the network. Natively, your phone has to, it has to do an ARP request. It needs to do DNS requests. It has to hit the essential thing. So it's hard for him to answer because it does hit the network.
Well, you get into the define scan, right? Like define, like we get into the process of as technicians or as engineers, we're like, yeah, so the words you're using don't mean what you think they do.
And it's like, and you can tell they're just going through this list of questions that are just like baffling. Gulo?
My printer scans my whole network. My TV scans my whole network. They are set up on other VLANs that have access to nothing else but themselves. And we're worried about a phone app that already has access to probably everything on your phone anyways, because that's just how things work.
That's not true. I would actually say, like, at least the iPhone, I can say you do get to declare whether or not it has ability to look for other devices on your network. Whether or not it has access to your photos, whether or not
Android's finally getting there.
Like iPhone's really, really good about locking down apps. Like you're not going to be able to access all the files on the system. Like it cannot access all the files. It has its own sandbox. It has its own part in the database. So like, no, I'm not personally. If I load TikTok on my phone, I'm not worried about it eating all the data on my phone. Like there has been ones which just gobble up I wouldn't give it access to like my photo album because there has been apps which just eat all your photo album and throw them up. My concern is you legitimately have the usage of what they're looking at, how long they're looking at it for. Like you have all the algorithmic decisions that you make. That is a tremendous amount of information. which you can then deem. What was it? There was the whole research that was done in, oh goodness, it was like 3 years ago, where like it was something along the lines of 3 minutes of usage, and you can determine an exact person down to, if you're given their zip code and 3 minutes of usage, you can identify the individual. And I don't think that's that nuts, because you can identify gender, location, what their interests are. Like, you need other information too, but it's like there is a tremendous amount of data just within the algorithm. And then the other thing which always terrifies me with these type of, let's say, global algorithms is the algorithmic anomaly. Like, I think this is where the government regulation is going to have to go, and where it's kind of thinking about going, but they have zero idea how to implement it, because it's just, you're dealing with 80 and 100-year-olds. But what is the algorithmic anomalies that they need insight into, that they need to start regulating? Like, we know ChatGPT and AI and large language models tend to sit, I'm going to say it this way, to a little of the left, because the internet is a little bit farther left. So because of that, reality is a little left. You know what I mean? But like, so it's gonna do that, and it's gonna prioritize that type. And people are like, oh, because it's a liberal, crazy Democrat, like putting stuff in the water. Like, it's not that. It's just like, it's been trained on that data. So my question is, at what point do we move into, we need to now have more insight into the algorithms and start controlling that? Like, that is nuts, because we're going to have the 80 or 100-year-olds.
That's just undoable, right? Like that's not feasible to do. And I think the premise of that question is flawed. Gator, you've been lined up for a while here. What's up?
All good, man. All good. Trying to trace back to a couple different threads now. Long story short, if this is ultimately trying to find out who is running a company, and if it's a foreign adversary or not, if this goes into effect, how deeply are we actually going to look at other companies as well? So saying TikTok is out of the name, how deep are we going to say, okay, is this a puppet for somebody else? And if that's the issue, it's one deal. If it's who are they selling the data to in other countries, that's another deal. If it's talking about, if it's going to corporate overlords versus governments directly, these are some of the deeper issues that are connected with the TikTok ban versus just the surface level of this one app for now. And what does that mean long-term wise for our security and privacy online? Those are the long-term questions.
So for sure, I think one of the biggest things that's going to happen is this is going to be banned on the premise of selective enforcement, where the government can't just single out TikTok. Like that will not happen, right? They have to write the bill that basically says all of these features that happen to describe TikTok, and also we're going to go look at other companies, right? Like, like that's the way the bill has to be written. Otherwise, the judicial system will just fucking tear it apart. And so it kind of leads me to two questions, and I think they're two somewhat loaded questions that I have for all of you. First one is, do you think there is or likely to be backdoors in TikTok, the app, that enable China to access data on your phone? And when I say China, I mean the government in China to access data in your phone. Do you think it is likely, or that there is that capability in the app?
I think that it's going to be more likely moving forward, just because people are going to be trying to sideload things. And all of that is that's not going to go through any type of QA or QC or anything else, any of the security requirements. I think that this is actually going to make things a whole lot worse, because now people are going to try to pirate it, and it's not going to be a safe way of pirating.
Gator, what are your thoughts?
Does it need to be that way for the government, or can we continue just to have corporations sell the data to the governments? And is that really?
There's a second question that's going to cover that. The primary question is, this question is, do you think there is or likely to be backdoors that allow China access to user data in TikTok?
So Gator after you, and then I'll talk.
Silk, do you have an answer to that question?
I think there's a fundamental flaw with thinking that the end game of any exploit is remote code execution.
No, that's not.
And no. I know that's not what you're saying, but I'm going to elaborate on that. My comment, which is, you're asking, you asked two different questions, even though you phrased the almost identical. It's one, can TikTok access other data on your phone right now? I think no, because how the app is built right now, unless you are violating things like, again, I know iPhone much better than I know Android from a security perspective in testing the applications. Unless it's like fundamentally breaking iOS restrictions, it can't do that. Can't
Well,
now.
hold on.
Okay.
It can if you give it permission.
If
right?
you give it permission.
Right. And so you've given it permission, right? So this is the thing that I'm saying, right? What I'm saying is, of course, TikTok can access whatever you give it permission to. What I'm saying is, do you think there is likely a mechanism that enables parties outside of TikTok itself to access the data you've given it access to? For example, the Chinese government to reach in and just scoop that data up.
So the short answer is absolutely yes, because we do it. Hold on, because we do that in the United States all the time.
No.
Yeah. Yes.
No.
Hold
Not in the same way. So hold on.
No.
This is there's the second question actually covers this. So that's question number one. Just about everyone I think here goes, there probably is something, right? So let's leave that to the side for a second.
Let me finish my topic.
Let me ask you the second question because it covers this. Do you think there is and should be an ideological difference between a country being given access to this, the government being given access to this, versus a company? Because the company has access to this right now. And as we've said, they're free to, in theory, sell whatever they want. They have to anonymize it depending on the privacy policy, all that stuff, right? That is 100% doable. Some of those backdoors exist in the United States, but only in the context of being given a warrant to be able to do various searches, right? They can't just break into a company and take everything they want.
They can't break into the company. But things like the Patriot Act and whatnot completely blew away the ability where it required a warrant, it required probable cause and whatnot, and can be done in the guise of security.
You realize the Patriot Act sunsetted in 2020, right?
Absolutely, but it was renewed. It was renewed multiple times under different mechanisms, which still gave it ability to bypass search and seizure and all the legality which requires to do that. But here's the thing, also, what my point was not that they automatically get access to this and then fire it all. You can just buy it on the open internet for pennies on the dollar. This was the Cambridge Analytica. No, not exactly, but you can get quite a bit of data from Cambridge Analytica, where it's just like pennies on the dollar to get tremendous amount of data. Heck, John Oliver did that with congressmen. It was hilarious. Like there was multiple times you can just buy this data on the general internet. And the idea that we can de-enigmatize it or all of this or de-obfuscate and whatnot is like, this is a whole tremendous thing of what does that mean from a security perspective, and can it be de-enigmatized?
Yeah, and in fact, we know, for example, the FBI is free to just like buy that data, right? Like they can't. But so like, and so your answer is no, there isn't an ideological fundamental difference between a country or a foreign nation putting a backdoor in and letting them just scoop up whatever they want and allowing a company to just sell it, right? And we've had this discussion on the channel before. Without those stronger privacy guarantees in law, there's functionally not really a difference between I'm going to ban TikTok because it has a backdoor versus I'm not going to ban everything else, even though they're doing the same thing and they're just selling the data on the back end and you can de-enigmatize it or de-anonymize it. So I think that's the flawed piece of this is we all kind of agree there's probably all kinds of backdoors in all of these apps and TikTok in particular for a variety of reasons, not for the intent of doing psyops in the general public, but just on the ability to gain information about a variety of people. But more importantly, there isn't really a fundamental difference between a government doing that and the government just going and buying that data directly from the company itself, which they're totally allowed to sell anyway.
Yeah, I have a whole rant. I mean, again, on privacy in a moment, but before I do, Gator.
All right.
So while we can also have the government go through and buy these pieces of data, the other thing is that all they have to do is ask for it at this point without a warrant. And if you want to be able to see all those times those have been violated, go to the EFF.org site, look at they're constantly reporting on this. When Digital and I were going through and doing the Holland Network podcast for 3 years, every other week it was somebody has asked for this information and it was given freely without a warrant. So even though we have the proper procedures of going through and doing this, it's been bypassed, and it's continued to be bypassed because it's not quote unquote necessary. Only when they get caught with their hand in the cookie jar and it becomes a big publicized news is, oh, okay, sorry, our bad, we'll backtrack and go ahead and get the paperwork to do this now, and then it just happens all over again.
When you have to think about it from the business perspective too, it's like if you are subpoenaed for something, you have legal parts in your contract which says you will notify them. You're making an attempt to notify. You have notification within 6 months. But then there's always the rider on top of that contract, which is if it does not violate like another NDA, unless I'm asked not to. Which if I'm asked not to, now all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, the only way I can fight this as a small business is what? Sue the FBI? Like, my company versus them? Like, no, you're going to give in every single time because you care about making money for your small business. And you're not going to go, I'm going to fight this because it's going to bankrupt my business going against the FBI.
Yeah.
Gulo?
So they don't always ask with a subpoena. A lot of the ones that are on the EFF, they just flat out ask. And the company's like, okay, yeah, this is a government agency not going through proper channels, but here's whatever it is that you're asking for. As far as small businesses suing, wasn't there a privacy email company that's about the only thing I remember about them was that they had to turn over all of their encryption keys and they printed out like 500 pages to actually hand them rather than giving them like the encryption key to
amazing.
that data?
That is awesome.
Well, there was a whole mail client company that went under because they refused to give the keys and they said, fuck you, we're just going to burn it.
Mm-hmm. No, what Gulo was saying is they did give them the keys, but they printed it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were eventually forced to. But yeah, they did go under. And the other side of this, and I know this is a little bit political, is I don't see much of a difference between companies, corporations, and the governments. A lot of the lobbying, a lot of the information, they're all just the same thing. They're the same people. These people sit on boards. It's just one giant
incestuous relationship. I think that's the term you're looking for.
No,
for 500.
I think that's totally valid, and that was something that I had a third question in my back pocket. Is do you see is there a real difference between Google and the U.S. federal government at this point? I mean, fundamentally, there is some differences, but in terms of like functional reality, if Google decided they wanted to like ruin your life, they could probably ruin your experience on the internet or capability of interacting with a variety of services that are fundamentally integrated into everyday life, such that they could put a massive hamper on your ability to operate. And that is typically a power that is reserved to governments, right? Depriving you of the ability to integrate with society. So yeah, I think it's totally valid to say I don't think there is a huge difference between these mega corporations and the government at this point. And I think that's a big talking point that's not really discussed a whole lot.
I think the other
work just prison for companies.
I think the piece which is when you start looking at like we'll say the control the companies have, I think what's terrifying is so you guys know pen test, all of that. Woo! My power just went out. You guys there?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you, Silk.
I have no idea if we're just live. I think I just flipped on over to a generator. Here we go. I'll get my camera spun back up a minute. Wow. Okay. Cool. So I think as I get my camera back up, woo, I'm on generator power. What's interesting to me is like you have I'm going to hand it back off to someone else as I get my camera and everything back up. That is amazing.
Hey, you're up.
Wow.
Beautiful.
You're good.
Hi.
Look at that failover, man. Beautiful.
So that is a failover. I'm pretty proud of that one. I just found out my camera is not in a battery backup. Surprise. What's amazing to me is when you look at a lot of these, when you look at the corporations and you look at like the control they have, it is the internet we find is remarkably centralized. And what I was going to say is, like, I did pen testing, all of that, but every once in a while, like you'll be doing testing and you're, gosh, shoot, I'm doing for my own IP, my home IP, and you get banned on something like Cloudflare, like legitimately, and half the internet is like inaccessible to you. Or we have had servers banned on AWS before and things like that, and all of a sudden, like half the internet goes down to you. And you think between like AWS, Apple, really AWS, Google, and like Microsoft, those three clouds, those things, like there starts becoming a fundamental issue there. Like, and we know those companies have had those ancestral relationships before with the hiring. So like, it's not crazy to think that they're like, let's all three get together and do this thing when it comes to privacy. And what's weird to me is that the companies tend to dictate privacy requirements, and then those get pushed into law. This is the terrifying thing to me, is they build the technical requirement or the ability to do a thing and then go, yep, this would be a good law to pass. And then they push that up, and then it becomes regulation. And then the only way to adhere to it is what? Buy the service they just created to adhere to this thing. And that's the part which is just frustrating and terrifying. And I don't know if I agree with it or not, because in some ways it does help with privacy. They say like Snowflake and Azure just came out with a better like data enigmatizing like encryption and all of that. And then all of a sudden we saw this make its way into the New York privacy policy. It's good. It's better for privacy, but now you have all the companies in New York who only solution to adhere to this thing is just pay for this additional service in Azure.
So
Gula.
I agree with that, and I think it's a bad thing, but I also think it's a way of battle testing some of this stuff as well. I don't necessarily want our 80 and 100-year-old lawmakers to go out there and just start making shit up because senility, Jesus. But there's also the companies are at least testing things out and trying them and seeing what's working and what's not working. And it's kind of moving through a little bit of a process. I'm sure there's a better way to do it. I just don't know what it would be.
So as not to be horrendously ageist, can we all agree that when we're 70 years old, that no one should listen to us either?
No one should be. Wait, hold on. At what point did they start listening to us anyway?
Oh, that's fair.
I can see it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's 11 people listening to us right now. So I'm just saying, in 35 years, that's where's the cutoff point? Where should people stop listening to us?
I'm going to bring up a point, though. So my grandmother is turning 100 years old. 100 years old.
Awesome.
And she's all there. Like, most time you get to that point, she's all there. And I always crack up. She'll call me, did you hear what such and such congressman did? I'm like, no. How do you have time for these things? But what's amazing to me is you go into like the retirement home. She's in Tennessee and all of that. And I look and I go, this place is like a place for old people. Like it's a place for old people. It's all the stuff they're playing like canasta or whatever game it is where it's like, oh my gosh, like what this is. But it had me thinking going, when you said like when we get that old, what are we doing? Like because the old folks home is not going to look like it is now. Is anyone else excited for like Xbox Halo parties? I'm sorry, I'm just like
No. Best segue ever. VR. That's what our old folks games are gonna do.
I laid it down. I was hoping you would do it. Yes.
Actually, I have one for this.
Hula.
There was an Uber driver way back in LA that picked me up one time from the airport, and he was talking about, he's like, hey, what do you do? And I was like, VR stuff. He's like, have you ever thought of doing something for old folks' homes? So one of the small projects that I worked on with some others was we set up a little VR scenario for a baseball game from way back in the actual day. And we set it up. We went to a retirement home. We sat down. We put headsets on a whole bunch of them. We made popcorn and we made some hot dogs and stuff. And then they just watched like the Cubs win like the pennant from like 19 whatever. And it was amazing. So many of them were so happy and so ecstatic. I'm a little bit sad that we only did that one like trial and we didn't continue on with it. But I'm not sure what baseball game I'd want to watch when I'm like 70 or 80, but there's probably something really cool out there that would be like, okay, let's do this in VR.
I
Gator, you
desperately
had
just want a Halo party.
before we went on our segue, you had something you wanted to talk about. What did you?
No, we fully switched subjects. It would be too
All right.
hard to go back on the other track. The to the point of elderly and making sure, okay, at what point in time do we have that cutoff? Just had a 96-year-old grandfather pass away, and he was all there mentally up until about a year ago, and he was able to feed himself up until about a week before his death. So the
Yeah.
whole thing of and awesome to hear about your grandma at 100 years old, which is amazing. This is something that everybody's age and health deteriorates very, very differently as well. So not necessarily an age cutoff, but okay, can you still play chess? Can you still tell me your full name? Can you tell me what seat or what state you're supposed to be going through and representing? And when's the last time you talked to one of your constituents? Oh, never mind. That's fine. We'll move
Can
on.
Gulo even do that right now? No.
No, but also, yeah, no, never mind. I'm not going to go there.
Let's talk. You went over. We went
all
over
I
to.
want to say is, I think you could outfit an assisted living home with like 20 or 30 VR headsets today relatively cheaply. And I think that would be like a fantastic upgrade to every single, home out there, because they could, like that would be dope experience. Like, you don't need to be super mobile to be able to enjoy VR.
I just this hits at such a weird time because both things, I just had the kids watch Wall-E, so I had that going through my head, and then second one, I'm in between trying to find another book series, so I just like threw on something which you don't have to pay attention to, which is like Ready Player One, and it's like, yep, all of a sudden these things start feeling like these things start coming in close. The topic though was the one you brought up, Gowrie, which was the metaverse, but Meta open source their VR OS, which is interesting.
I don't know if they open sourced it. They opened the platform for other headsets to be able to use. So previously, this operating system was only available on top of the Meta Quest platform. They're opening it up for all the other, because and so like, here's, I think, what the play is, right? The play is essentially a bunch of people want to get innovative with the hardware, and they want to go crazy and build high end, low end, all kinds of headsets. The problem is building the software to support that. What most platforms are doing is they go, okay, we made the thing, offload the software stuff to Steam and just let Steam manage it, or let, whatever these other companies do it. And there's been relatively, my understanding, the support there for those types of headsets are not great. And I think what Meta's play is, let's open up our operating system so that solves quote unquote the software support for hardware developers, so that they can say, just take the Reality OS or whatever, I forget what they call it, Horizons OS, and develop your hardware on top of that from the beginning, and then we'll handle the software support from there. And I'm fascinated by this play, and my question, I guess, specifically to Gulo, is good thing, bad thing, in terms of, I know your opinions on Meta, but like, let's say it wasn't Meta and it was Steam
Google.
VR, Apple, or whoever. Do you think that this would be a net positive for VR in this sense?
A net positive, possibly. I think that this is more of a political move than an actual I'm trying to help out others, because I think that like how the open standards for Open VR, Steam VR stuff, they own the market. That is pretty much the market. Meta's trying to carve out its own section, and the only way for it to compete is to open this up to other hardware. But I don't think that they're doing it necessarily out of the goodness of their heart. I think they're doing it just so that they can be like, hey, you should use our stuff, and then you can get wrangled into our ecosystem, and then this is how everything works. In my mind, it's their only play to compete with the companies that have already done this and already control the market.
So I'm not super tied into the VR side, but my understanding is Meta actually has one of the better supported platforms with a lot of content. Except that you're locked into their hardware and locked into their ecosystem. Am I wrong about that? Or in terms of
They
like, not in terms of
they
us, but in terms of the general consumer being able to grab something off the shelf and like download an app off of an app store?
So they have their proprietary. It's been a hot minute. I dropped Meta when they started to do all of the Facebook integration stuff. So I haven't. I'm not like super up to date on what they have, but they had their Oculus store, the Meta store, that was a direct competitor to every other gaming store out there, like Steam. And when they set that up, you had very specific requirements that you had to do to build your stuff to make it into their store versus going with someone like Steam, where it was like, okay, I meet all of the requirements. It is an open system that allows all of the everything's out there, while the Metastore and Oculus were more of a closed ecosystem that you had to jump through more hoops to do. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's still the case, but I do know that the companies I consult for have to do special things to build for a lot of the meta stuff. But then again, they have to do special things to build for the PlayStation VR.
Yeah.
Um,
So there was my understanding of the current state of the Meta ecosystem is there's kind of like two tiers for apps in terms of like there's the primary storefront where you can download stuff, and then there is this like off to the side background thing like where the developers can publish their stuff, but it's not made directly available to consumers. And then you have to do the slow work towards like full integration to get it moved over to the App Store. And my understanding is they're going to make all of those apps that are trapped in this like purgatory state available to the general consumer now, rather than having to fit everything on the their curated side. So it's kind of an interesting evolution. It's not just that they're opening up the platform for hardware developers; they're also making all of those trapped apps available now. So it's kind of interesting. Curious what your thoughts on the the hardware environment in terms of where are we with headsets, and is it still the Wild West?
And I another question kind of to ask on that too, which is
Oh
going to
yeah.
piggyback, is
uh,
is there a
Gator.
dichotomy that exists like Apple Android? Is this going to be kind of like Apple versus Horizon OS, or am I missing it?
so most of the headsets now that you buy are sickeningly dumb. They're Android phones. They run Android OS. Last Meta headset I played with was literally running Android OS. So I had to go through and run the APKs and install things using all of the Android tools and make changes through that. They do have their own proprietary stuff in there as well, so it's not like 100%, but it's a cell phone. Your headset is literally a cell phone now. And the amount of graphics degradation and processing power that you've lost because this is a cell phone is absolutely horrendous. I'm still, I'm an elitist. I still believe strongly about hooking up my headset to my computer and having a big PC. Well, not necessarily a big PC. I guess my VR rig's like 5 or 6 years old now, but it runs everything that I want it to run. It does all the development stuff that I need it to do, and I actually have quality. I have decent resolution. I have high quality audio that goes through there. These inside out tracking things with just they're just running off a cell phone. They're great for the consumers and they're making it more widespread, but I believe that it's actually watering down the technology a lot.
So there's a lot of information that Gulo is in the industry for as a consumer. First gen Quest that I've had and still am running at this point. It has not broken. Playing with the family and whatnot. You have your official app store. I went through the process of not going to Facebook, but staying on Oculus. They finally have just got to the point where you've got your own Oculus account that went to Meta. You don't have to have a Facebook account connected to it anymore, which is great. It only took them 2 or 3 years. Woo! Um, they also highly encourage folks and don't block being able to do a side loading app. And that's actually called SideQuest. So you can go through and either do that with a PC, or you can actually download it from your browser and run it in browser all on the same device. So when it comes to quality, the Quest 1 is pretty rough at this point in time. If you're looking for screen door effect, if I wanted to use this as a virtual headset for my computer, there are apps to do it. The screen door effect makes it to where I cannot look at a terminal because there are so many pixels for the screen door effect. Versus if you look at some of the newer ones, it's gotten better. Depending on if you want a smart headset that's standalone versus if you want just a dumb device that's a display to put onto your face, like your X Airs or your Nreals. But then there's also something called big screen. Pretty expensive. You actually custom scan your face to get the printout to actually have this thing go closer to your face than just a one off the shelf. But you're also talking a step up in price. It's just under $1,000 for that now. I think it's interesting to see that they're trying to quote unquote open their OS for other people, because on the other places inside of the world, you've got the whole Pico line and them trying to be able to spin up their own thing, bring those over to the States to make it price competitive with Oculus. That has been trying to happen for like the last 2 or 3 years, and it keeps on getting shut down. So the amount of money that Facebook has poured into VR versus their market share, they poured a lot of money into it, and then they started looking at how much money they're bringing in. That started to peak and then fall hard this last year. So, the whole dichotomy of Apple and now Quest OS is super interesting, to where even the people who are real hardcore Apple folks are having a hard time making that jump. If they bought it, it's like one of the most returned items at this point.
I believe it.
With the Apple headset.
$3,500. That is utterly insane.
Right.
Like for
It's
$3,500.
Oh, $3,500. Yeah.
$3,500 to buy it. But like the thing which like I am fascinated by the Vision OS.
Mm-hmm.
Not for like nothing sold me. The games and Beat Saber and all of the stuff that you can do. I don't have a VR headset or anything like that. The one where I was like, oh, that's actually really cool, is when the person puts it on and looks at their laptop, and then it pops up into this big screen in front of them. Now, there's limitations. It's only one screen, but it would be pretty cool to be able to put the thing on and then get like 4 monitors and be able to interact with them that way. And they did some really clever things. Like you look at it and it only actually renders high res where you're looking. Like, there was a lot of really clever infrastructure. But then I go to the point of like, do I really want to stick something on my face for 8 hours a day to work on a computer when, I can actually rest my eyes at times not looking at the computer? But they're interesting. They are really interesting.
So as far as resting your eyes on a computer, you can rest your eyes in VR as well. You can just flip over to another scene that your brain makes real. So looking off into a vista, staring at the ocean, going into space, whatever. As far as, I just lost my other train of thought.
Well, let me ask this. You said you can rest your eyes. So like, we've always heard I don't know what the term is. Every 10 minutes, you're supposed to look away at something far to give your eyes a moment to focus. How does that translate to VR? Like if you're trying to refocus your eye, does it do that in VR?
Yes. So when you're not looking at the screen that's 3 inches in front of you, you're looking at what is displayed on the screen through those lenses. So you're looking at a distance. Your eyes will focus and unfocus. Oh, foveated tracking is what I was going with. So foveated tracking is where they actually look at where you're looking at. They have little sensors, eye trackers inside the headsets that allow it to render whatever you're staring at a higher resolution. You can break, if you have a lazy eye, you can really screw up some headsets, really bad. It's great. But with that's something else that I don't trust with Meta and stuff. And this was a project that I was working on for one of the VR companies I consulted for, was setting up foveated tracking to figure out where people were looking at while they were in games, while they were accessing the Steam store, what ads caught their eyes, because you can literally track everything that somebody looks at. and be like, okay, they stared at this for 3 seconds, they stared at that for a millisecond, they moved on to this, they moved their body in this fashion because the trackers moved, their head moved, you could tell their shoulders slumped. There's all this external data that you don't get from standard consuming, like browsing the website, that you now can get through headsets because it's got eye tracking, it's got body tracking, it's got all of these things that help to get even more data than what you thought was like in general possible.
So you think Mark Zuckerberg is Nolan Sorrento? Ready Player One
yes,
villain.
A slightly different version, but yes.
What's the thing is, like, we've had the ability to get all those metrics in browsers now, where your cursor is, like where you hover, where you move the cursor, like the things that you think would be private to your computer are not private. Like same thing on mobile. Where did they tap? When they tap it? And it blew me away when I started doing security assessments on some of these things of like just how much data was there and then how much you can mux with it too. Like if I'd say, oh yeah, they tapped 50 million times in this one corner within a hair of a second. Like how does the logger deal with that? And I think what's interesting to me is that unlike browsers where you can't necessarily force a involuntary behavior, where you could legitimately on headsets force an involuntary behavior of throwing up two products and see which one they'd look at quicker and stuff like that. Like which of these ads, like you could do rapid, which ad do they respond to best by throwing two product, like the same product advertised two different ways, which one they look at, like which one catches the eye. Like those are tremendous like metrics. And this is where privacy to me just like deteriorates into nothing of like, what do they do with the data? How do they do? And then we have the treasure troves of Google data. And this is the stuff that terrifies me because we know, like even ISPs, it has been shown that ISPs have gathered tons and tons and tons and tons of traffic for a very, very long time. But we always go, oh, it's HTTPS. It's all SSL. It's all TLS. Like who cares? And then 6 years, 8 years, 10 years later, we find ways to break SSL v2 and decrypt that data. So like, that was like way before we had privacy regulations. What's happening with that data? What's used with that data? And I always wonder when we get these massive password stuffing, like credential stuffing attacks that happen with the old data that wasn't breached and then it comes out breached. Like, there are so many discussions that be had on that front. I'm jumping us to another topic though, which is one I shamelessly want to talk about, which is DEF CON. I just want to talk about DEF CON. I don't know why. I just want to talk about DEF CON. I want to talk about like Las Vegas Convention Center. We haven't talked in a very long time. Are you guys going to DEF CON this year?
Yes.
Hell yeah.
Looking forward to it. Absolutely.
Gulo? Or are you still on the fence?
Yeah. I'm still on the fence. I'll most likely be going because I am doing at least one badge there, and it appears that the Darknet has an eye washing station for one of my badges. So I kind of have to go, I think.
Oh, I love you.
We
Kulo.
still don't know how because we didn't request it. Kulo didn't request it. I got other contest people hitting me up say, "Yo, why do you have an eye washing center in your booth?" We share the booth with somebody else. And neither of us were. So
2 words: acid
I didn't
experiment.
request an eye washing station, but the chemicals that I said I was going to be using, I think they deemed that it was a requirement.
Oh my god!
Dude, hold on. This has to make it into the like closing ceremonies somehow, where we announce that like new thing for DEF CON, we're now required to have eye wash stations at certain competitions.
oh god.
I've been
Safety first.
seeing safety first. I've been seeing oh gosh. I've been seeing pictures of the Las Vegas Convention Center, realizing that we might we got our wish. Like I don't think it's a good wish, but I think it's probably a wish nonetheless. It may be a wish we wanted or don't have any control of. We're under one roof. Like we've said, oh yeah, we're under one roof before. But there's always like one other hotel which has workshops or one other hotel which has this. I don't like the fact that you're split up, like hotels are all over the place. But what's nutty to me, it's like one room. Like the Las Vegas Convention Center is like, yeah, sure, there's upstairs and stuff like that. It's like one giant room they're going to separate up. Like, have you seen the pictures of what was it, the national broadcaster or so, whatever it was, the NAB or whatever it was? There was like the microphone Ruck Road and all that was there. Like that was in the Las Vegas Convention Center, and it's just a massive open space. It's nutty.
So I've been there from the past life. I was able to go to CES and then also did multiple woodworking shows there. And it is a huge amount of walking. So make sure you have great walking shoes because those concrete floors are hard. It's rough on you. But after that, yeah, I'm super pumped about it. I'm curious to see, because when we were watching a couple of Deviant Oleum's videos on walking in the best hotels that are in the area, they're already super expensive at this point, but making sure that you can get as close to there as possible. They were talking about the west area of the conference center, and then there is a north area of the conference center with a walkway between that is covered. So I've only seen things on the larger part on the west side, so I'm super pumped. The fact is we're going from, was it 500,000 to 800,000 square feet of conference area? It's like, woo! I'm pumped.
Yeah, I got my ticket. I'm happy. I got my flights officially set, and then the price like doubled like the next day, which I'm like,
Whew.
for once I timed that right. Usually
Yeah,
it's the opposite.
I still need to get my flights. Oh, good God.
With that, I don't know. We've talked about a bunch. I am out of topics on my end. I don't know about you guys. Is there anything more to talk about? Otherwise, we'll give some final thoughts.
I really like the fact that you have like pen and paper there and you're crossing things. You're like a real report, like an anchor now.
Yeah.
Consummate professional.
Consummate professionals. Yeah, I had a list. It's easier to keep track of. Yeah, it's like almost like I know what I'm doing. That's not true at all. I still have no idea what's going on with your audio. My left ear feels worn out a little bit. Figure that one out. With that though, Gowrie, what do you got for us?
Delete computers, return to monkey. I don't have any closing thoughts other than, privacy's fucked as usual.
Gator.
So to Gowrie's point, it's like, oh man, it's been an interesting year. There's been a lot going on. Make sure the ones that you love, that you tell them that you love them because you don't know how long you got them for, and make sure to go love your hacker family.
Gulo?
If you decrypt my old SSL data, I want some of that back because it doesn't exist anymore. Some of those photos are really good.
Thank you for joining us on Hacker Hangouts on a Saturday morning. Thank you for the crew and the things that they do. With that, thank you for watching and hack on.